This next video is about the accrued interest payment on a bond purchase. Now, when someone buys a bond from someone else within the secondary market, well, keep in mind, whoever owns the bond clips the coupon, right? Collects a full 6 months worth of interest payments. But the person who sold the bond, right, held that bond for some period of time before selling it. So the bond buyer owes the bond seller the seller's portion of their prorated share of the next interest payment date. So we'd have to figure out, well, how many days of interest has accrued since the last interest payment date, and then how much money does the bond buyer owe the bond seller? So let's take a look at this example. Your customer buys 10M of ABC Corporation 6.25% F&A bonds at 104 and 3/8 on Monday, May 12th. So how many days of accrued interest does the buyer owe the seller? And then how much in dollars and cents does the accrued interest does the buyer owe to the seller? Our first step is to calculate how many days of accrued interest. So interest accrues from the morning of the last interest payment date until the day before the settlement date, right? Up to, but not including the settlement date of the trade. Because the settlement date is the day that securities actually change hands and the buyer takes possession on the settlement date of the trade. So first we need to figure out, when was the last interest payment date? As an F&A bond, that means it makes interest payment February 1st and August 1st, right? Every payments are spaced 6 months apart. So the interest is going to accrue from February 1st, the morning of the last interest payment date. Now the trade date was Monday, May 12th. With the trade date was Monday, May 12th, when is the settlement date of the trade? Now corporate bonds settle in 2 business days after the trade date. Trade date plus 2 business days, or T plus 2. So the settlement date of the trade is Wednesday, May 14th. So we're going to calculate accrued interest from the morning of the last interest payment date until the day before the settlement date, which would be February 1st up until May 13th. Now, how many days is that? Now, corporate bonds use the 3360 convention, which means to do the math on this, to do the calculation, we're just going to work under the assumption that every month is 30 days long and there are 360 days in a year. I would just to do the formula, just do the math. So let's count how many days. Now, they owe interest for the full month of February. So February is, yes, 30 days in this calculation. March is also 30 days. There are 30 days in April. And plus, there are for 13 days in May, right? From the May 1st up until the day before settlement, May 13th. If we add that all up, that comes out to 103 days. So the buyer owes the seller 103 days of accrued interest. Now, how much is that? Now, to figure that out, we have to figure out, well, how much interest does the bond pay? So we're going to use the stated interest rate, or the coupon, to figure out the annual interest payment date. And then to figure out the daily accrual, we divide that number by 360. So how much interest does the bond pay? Well, its stated interest rate, it tells us, is 6.25%, which is 6.25% of the $1,000 face value, or the par value of the bond. Now, how much is 6.25% of $1,000? First step is to convert the fraction into a decimal. So 6.25% in fractional format is the same as 6.25% in decimal format. Now you can use a calculator if you need to, right? So 1/4 is 1 divided by 4 is 0.25. So it's 6.25% of the $1,000 par value. Now, how much is that? Well, you can take your calculator, go 0.0625 times 1,000, and you'll get 62.5, which would mean $62.50 per year. Now, there's a faster way to do that. Instead of using your calculator, just take the number that they give you, 6.25%, erase the percent sign, and then move the decimal point one place to the right to 62.5, or $62.50 per year. Now, that's the annual interest payment. How much is the daily accrual? If we take the $62.50 per year, and again, we assume that there are 360 days in a year. So we're going to multiply that. So now this is time, of course, we're definitely going to get our calculator. So we're going to take 62.5 divided by 360, and we get 0.1736. Figure that's about 17.36 cents per day. So I'm not going to clear my calculator. Now I'm going to take what the number I've got here and multiply this by the number of days of accrued interest times 103. And that we come to, now we're going to round off to the nearest penny, $17.88 per bond. So the buyer owes the seller $17.88 out of the next interest payment date for the 103 days of accrued interest on the bond. Okay. Now, of course, now we're going to figure out, now we know the value per bond. Now we're going to multiply the accrued interest per bond by the number of bonds. Well, the test question says your customer buys 10M. Well, the M stands for mil, which is the Latin word for thousand. So 10,000 of ABC corporate bonds. Now, since each bond is a face amount of $1,000, it means it's 10 bonds. So $17.88 per bond times 10 bonds is $178.80. And that is how much is going to be added to the price of the bond purchase, which goes from the bond buyer to the bond seller for that seller's prorated share of the next interest payment date. Now, as you remember, of course, that government bonds use a little different formatting, so we're going to see that next.